My son accidentally sent me the message he wrote to his mother-in-law, "Thank you for everything." Only at 30 did I finally get the mom I waited for all my life. I was raised by a woman who never saw how talented I am. And you noticed my talent just days after we met. In an hour a courier will arrive. He'll park your new car on your porch. I remember your favorite color is red. I'm inviting you to a party in your honor this Friday. We'll celebrate your 60th together. I love you. Your son forever. I listened to that message 10 times. I downloaded it as proof that no matter how much you invest in your own child, how much you love and forgive, he can turn away at any moment and choose someone who did nothing but speak a few flattering words. My name is Amanda. I'm 64. I devoted my whole life to my son, Roland, who now calls his mother-in-law Mom. I didn't throw the phone. I didn't scream into a towel or rip up old photos. I made tea. Jasmine. The kind he used to ask for when he had nightmares at 8 and pretended not to. I sat at the kitchen table, listened again, and told myself a story that would let me sleep. He didn't mean it. He's just trying to be polite. It's a phase. He's stressed. He's performing for his wife's family. And because mothers are experts at lying to themselves for the sake of peace, I forgave him, privately, ceremonially, the way you forgive someone who hasn't asked. The next morning the voice note was gone from our thread. Deleted. No follow-up. No oops, Mom. No, you weren't supposed to hear that. He must have thought I hadn't listened yet. That I'm slow with technology. That I am, in his new vocabulary, aging. But that voice note was only the first swallow of spring. I'm not frail. At 60 I started Spanish to push back against rust. I alternate morning runs with Nordic walking. I meal prep more vegetables than a farmer's market. I have a man I like Peter. We've been seeing each other for 6 months. We kiss at movies and share playlists. Sometimes he stays over. I told him I don't want a second marriage. He told me he doesn't need a certificate to show up with flowers. We leave it there, comfortable, adult. Roland and his wife, Lila, have a talent for performance. Online, their smiles are polished. Offline, their eyes are always measuring. Lila can flatter a room into submission. Her mother, Evelyn, 60 this week, moves through life as if every door is already held open for her. People like that rarely notice who's holding it. Here's an oddity of fate. Evelyn and I share a birthday. The morning of, Facebook handed me a video, Evelyn in a red dress, squinting into California sun behind the wheel of a brand new cherry Tesla, Lila squealing, Roland clapping like a game show host. Caption, she deserves the world. Streamers. Balloons. The algorithm wanted me to celebrate with them. I shut my laptop and reminded myself not to compete. A son can give his mother-in-law a car, and his mother something quieter, something personal. Maybe Roland had found the vintage bicycle I'd been dropping hints about for 6 months, the one with the wicker basket for farmers market peaches. Or maybe he'd bought concert tickets, or a little weekend on the coast. It didn't have to be grand, it just had to be us. At 3 p.m., the doorbell rang. I checked the porch, no big bow, no bicycle, no courier with a grin. Just my son, framed by sun, holding a small white box. Happy birthday, Mom. He kissed my cheek and smelled like expensive cologne and hurry. Lila hovered behind him, phone ready, recording, always recording. Inside the box was a polished silver bracelet with a red button under a plastic tab. It's an emergency alert, Roland explained brightly, as if he were presenting a startup. If you ever get lost or forget how to get home, just press this. It pings my phone and your location. I'll come get you. Anywhere. Anywhere sounded like nowhere. I laughed because laughing is what polite women do when they're hit by a small, sharp thing. Thoughtful, I said. Like a leash but shinier. Lila's smile tightened. It's peace of mind, she said. For everyone. We had cake. They asked me to blow out candles twice, once natural, once for the real. We did the dance of modern families, perform, then pretend the performance didn't count. When they left, my kitchen was clean, and my chest was not. I went to put the bracelet in my sock drawer next to the letters Roland wrote from summer camp, and that's when I saw it. My pill bottle wasn't where I'd left it. It stood 2 inches to the right, like a picture frame after a small earthquake. The cap had a new, faint crescent scratch. The tablets inside were a different shape, slightly larger, with a chalky, unfamiliar tint. My prescriptions are boring: vitamin D, magnesium, a low-dose statin my doctor and I argue about twice a year. I am not on anything you could confuse with anything else. I poured out 3 tablets onto my palm. They felt wrong. People who don't cook think all sugar is the same. People who don't watch their bodies think all pills are the same. I measure by habit. I notice by practice. I didn't swallow them. Instead, I called Peter and asked if his son Nate, who works as a chemist for a pharma company, could come by for a second opinion on something weird. I kept my voice light. Peter must have heard something underneath, because he said, "We'll be there in 20. Nate arrived in a hoodie that said, "Trust me, I'm doing science." He peered at the tablets, flicked on a pocket light and said, "These aren't yours." I thought so, I said. "They're not deadly," he added quickly, catching the look in my eyes. "But they're off-label. The kind of compound that, at low dose, can cause confusion, visual artifacts and memory fuzz. If someone wanted you to seem scattered." Lila's sweet face. Roland's salesman voice. The bracelet. The word anywhere. "Thank you, Nate," I said. "Please don't mention this to your father yet." After they left, I stood at my sink and watched the evening pull itself across the street like a blanket. In the window, I looked exactly like someone who could be erased if you took her edges little by little. A misplaced bottle here, a missed greeting there, a bracelet buzzing at the wrong time. Once a story starts, Mom is slipping, every scene bends to fit it. That's the thing about stories, tell them enough and they harden into facts. So I told myself a different story. I would not swallow their script. I would write my own. I slipped the fake pills back into the bottle and put the bottle back in the exact wrong place, as if the invisible earthquake had returned. I set the shiny bracelet on my wrist and pressed the red button once, then again, listening for the tiny click, imagining the notification on Roland's phone, the jolt of panic, the rehearsal of heroism. If they wanted a performance, I would give them a masterpiece. The next morning, I forgot my grocery list and lost my keys on the porch. I pressed the button twice before lunch, once after, and when Roland arrived breathless, "Ty ask you," I blinked like a goldfish and asked if he was the deliveryman with my bicycle. He laughed, relieved, mistaking my act for proof. "Don't worry, Mom," he said, guiding me into a chair, glancing at the pill bottle he'd nudged into position. "We'll make sure you're safe." "Safe," I repeated and smiled in a way he couldn't read. That night, I emailed my lawyer about durable power of attorney, guardianship thresholds, and the legal definition of capacity in the state of California. I slept for 4 hours and dreamed in Spanish verbs: recorder, 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 remember. On my birthday, Roland gave Evelyn a Tesla, and gave me a button I could press to summon him like a dog. Fine. I would learn to love that button. I would press it until his meetings bled at the edges and his patience frayed, until the plan he'd whispered into someone else's voicemail ripped in his hands. Because if my son believed I was an easy edit, he was about to discover I'm an author. And this, dear reader, is where our real story begins. The first week I let the red button sing. Twice on Monday, where did I put the car? Oh right, I don't own 1 inch, once on Tuesday, which house is mine again? Asked directly in front of my porch number, 3 times on Wednesday because I forgot how to open the fridge. Each time, Roland arrived with that bright TV host panic, the one that's half concern and half performance. He'd pat my hand, look for the pill bottle, discover it was not where it belongs, then move it to a new wrong place, resetting the scene like a stagehand. "Mom," he said, smoothing my hair as if I were made of porcelain, "we should get you evaluated. Just a checkup. Dr. Harrow is excellent. Concierge care. Very discreet." Concierge, in their dialect, means complicit. I kept my voice silk. "If it would make you feel better." Hearing that, Lila's smile did something hungry. On Instagram she posted a story of a sunrise with the caption, "Sometimes love means doing hard things." She added a white heart and a dove. While they were busy narrating mercy, I was busy writing receipts. I met with my lawyer, Mrs. Lennox, who wears vintage brooches like warning signs and calls nonsense by its Christian name. We reviewed my trust, my healthcare proxy, and the thresholds for conservatorship and guardianship in California. "Capacity," she said, tapping the statute with a pencil, "is task-specific. You can be forgetful and still competent. But if a friendly doctor writes the right words..." "I'll bring you the friendly doctor," I said. I moved my real pills into a tea tin labeled Wild Sage, and left the decoys where Roland could find them with his heroic eyes. I started journaling in Spanish every night, not because I needed proof of cognition, though it wouldn't hurt, but because it soothed me to conjugate, yo recuerdo, tú recuerdas, él recuerda. Memory as grammar. I also set an hourly reminder on my phone titled Agua, Postura, Respira. Drink water, check posture, breathe. If anyone was going to mistake me for fading, they'd have to do it over my hydrated corpse. Friday, I let Roland take me to see Dr. Harrow. Lila came along in a white sweater that belonged on a yacht. The waiting room smelled like eucalyptus and liability. "Mom," Roland whispered, "be honest. Don't be afraid if you can't remember something. That's why we're here." I blinked at him. "Who are you again?" He laughed too loudly, confident we were on script. Dr. Harrow arrived with a watch expensive enough to pay a nurse for a year. His hair had that engineered randomness that takes 20 minutes. He didn't look at me when he shook my hand, he looked at my son. "I've reviewed some notes," he said, glancing at his tablet. "You've had incidents of disorientation." Lila's leg crossed itself like a warning. She sometimes doesn't recognize people she's known for years. "Only the ones wearing yachts," I said and smiled. Harrow led me through a brief cognitive screen. I named animals, spelled a word backward, copied a shape. I let 2 answers slip, enough to look wobbly, not enough to prove a pattern. He asked me to recall 3 words in 5 minutes. I recited them in Spanish, then English. He chuckled. "Fancy." Halfway through, his watch buzzed. He stepped into the hall. The door didn't latch. Through the sliver, I heard the exact kind of conversation every woman knows is not for her. The low male voice promising the right paragraph, the low, urgent son voice offering gratitude in advance. "Nothing dramatic," Roland said softly, "just language that helps with guardianship if it comes to that. We need to be proactive. Safety." I pulled my phone from my purse and tapped record. The little red waveform looked like a heartbeat. I didn't need the whole thing, a breath would do. When Harrow returned, I smiled the way polite women do when the arrow's already in their ribs. He scribbled a note, non-committal. "I'd like to see some labs," he said. "And perhaps a follow-up with a specialist." "Of course," I said. "While we're being thorough, I'll schedule with my primary, Dr. Patel, for a second opinion. She delivered half this town, and knows exactly how much nonsense fits in one white coat." Lila's mouth did the thing a mouth does when it swallows a lemon and calls it noble. Outside, Roland slipped the bracelet back around my wrist. "Press this if you get scared." "Scared of what?" I asked. "Being alone," he said. I thought of the first apartment I paid for with tips and stubbornness. Of the nights I sat on the floor with Roland, building cities out of blocks and bills overdue, teaching him that alone isn't the same as abandoned. "Darling," I said, "I've been alone longer than you've been married." The second week, I accelerated the act. I forgot to sign for a delivery, and the wine club shipment sat on the porch until the sun warmed the bottles like bathwater. I misplaced my bank card and left a burner on low, catching it just in time because smell is memory's bodyguard. Each time I pressed the button, Roland arrived, a little more frayed, a little more eager to believe his story was true. Lila began forwarding me articles about dignity in long-term care, with captions like praying about next steps folded hands. Meanwhile, I met Dr. Patel. She's the kind of doctor who takes your hand like it's a treaty. I told her everything. I showed her the bottle. I said the word that burns mothers' tongues, betrayal. She examined me, listened to my lungs, tested my reflexes, asked me to draw a clock. Then she sat back, eyes very steady. "You're not my most confused 64-year-old, she said. "You're my most organized." I laughed and cried into the same tissue. "Will you write that down?" "I'll write a letter," she said, "and I'll refer you to a neurologist who doesn't owe your son golf favors. Also, keep copies of everything. And, Amanda." She lowered her voice. "Do not swallow anything you didn't open yourself." On Tuesday, Roland arrived with a suitcase. "We think it's best," he said, not meeting my gaze, "if you come stay with us for a while. Just until we sort things out. Our place is closer to the hospital, and Lila can check on you during the day. You'll love it." Evelyn redid the guest suite. Evelyn's taste is beige like a rulebook. I imagined drowning in tasteful taupe. "This is wise," I said sweetly. "I worry about being alone." Relief washed his face. "Good. We'll pack a bag. Just the essentials." I let him choose the clothes, unflattering, the shoes, sensible, the hairbrush, we'll get to that, the toothbrush, we'll really get to that. I slipped my tea tin into the bottom of my purse and tucked Mrs. Lennox's card into my bra, where men never look unless they're invited. At Roland's house, I did all the things that make helpful daughters-in-law feel helpful. I forgot to close the fridge. I put the TV remote in the cutlery drawer and cutlery in a vase. I answered the door in my bathrobe, twice, for deliveries Lila had placed for herself, then apologized to the world like I'd committed treason. I mispronounced their friends' names, Sabrina, Serena, Serafina, and called their dog by my late husband's name. The group chat in their phones must have been a parade of halo emojis. And at night, when the house went quiet and their new appliances hummed to themselves like bored bees, I sat on the edge of the guest bed and listened to the ocean in my ears, the slow tide of vengeance coming in. On Thursday, while they were both out, I took a walk through the master bathroom, as if through a museum called the Cult of Self-Care. Everything was in its place, labeled aspirational. I looked at Roland's toothbrush, white and pure as a sermon. I considered the porcelain throne, empire of men's entitlement. I considered, and then I baptized. After, I picked up his hairbrush and took it to the yard. My dog, Bentley, a mutt with the soul of a duke, tilted his head at the gift. "For you," I told him, and brushed his fur until he shone. I put the brush back with one stray hair of a color that would never grow from Roland's scalp. Small things. Precise as stitches. I emptied half of Lila's favorite perfume, something French and expensive, into a travel bottle and replaced it with a knockoff I'd bought at a strip mall boutique called Essence. It smelled like sugar trying to blackmail a flower. I tightened the cap, wiped the glass with a microfiber cloth, and smiled at my reflection, a woman who keeps her hands steady. That evening, after dinner, I stirred Roland's vitamins into his tea, the vitamins he'd so lovingly recommended, and tipped in 2 of the very tablets he'd gifted me in my own bottle. Just enough to make his mind throw sparkles at the edges. He drank while boasting about a pitch with investors in the morning. "It's make or break," he said. "No mistakes." "No mistakes," I echoed, and for the first time in weeks, I slept like a woman whose plan has found its lungs. At dawn, I woke to the satisfying clatter of a life going slightly sideways, Roland bumping into the doorframe, talking to a lamp, Lila shushing him, and then gasping, "What are you even saying?" The dog hid under my bed. Sometimes justice starts as a tremor before the quake. On the kitchen island, under a bowl of decorative lemons, my red button bracelet blinked like a heartbeat. I pressed it once, then twice, then held it down just long enough to be an emergency. Somewhere in my son's pocket, a siren went off that had my name on it. "Mom," he shouted, appearing in the doorway wild-eyed and slightly glittering with nonsense. "Did you call me? Are you lost?" I looked at him, my beautiful boy, my liar, and said, very softly, "Who are you again?" He laughed, then didn't. Lila, pale with rage and perfume that smelled suspiciously cheap, grabbed her phone. "We are calling an ambulance," she announced. "Enough is enough." "Excellent," I said. "Let's all be very official." And as the siren wailed closer, as my son blinked at the air like it was snowing indoors, I thought, curtain up. Tomorrow would be for neurologists and notes, for Mr. Lennox's letterhead and Harrow's careful hedging. Tonight was for small, steady victories. For toothbrushes. For brushes. For bottles. For the woman I used to be, sharpening herself. The ambulance left without him. Roland had mumbled so many tangled, shimmering sentences at the paramedics that even they weren't sure what was real. Lila tried to steer the narrative, "It's my mother-in-law. She's declining. She pressed her bracelet again today. She forgets her own name." But Roland, jittery and sweating perfume that smelled like a mall kiosk, was too busy trying to convince them he could see sounds. They took him in for observation. I kissed my son's cheek on the stretcher. "Be brave," I whispered, and slipped his toothbrush into my sleeve like a magician palming a card. Lila glared as the doors closed. The siren was meant for me, but it carried him instead. For once, I didn't mind being misunderstood. That night, Lila sat across from me in Evelyn's freshly redecorated guest suite. Beige walls, beige sheets, beige lamps, the color of surrender. She perched on the edge of the bed as though visiting a patient, phone angled discreetly to record. "You should rest, Amanda," she said softly. "You've been confused. It must be frightening." I blinked at her, grandmother sweet. "Who are you again?" Her smile faltered, the way glass cracks silently before it shatters. When she left, I pulled Roland's toothbrush from my sleeve, tucked it into the bathroom drawer, and whispered, "Tomorrow." Some things take time to marinate. The next morning, Evelyn herself appeared, radiant in a red silk blouse, Tesla key dangling from her manicured hand. She swept into the kitchen like a queen inspecting her estate. "My poor dear," she cooed, cupping my chin. "We'll take care of you. You needn't worry about anything. Roland and Lila know best." It was then I realized, I was not just being erased. I was being replaced. Evelyn wasn't simply the bonus mom, she was auditioning for the role I had played for 30 years. My son's gratitude, my son's loyalty, my son's inheritance, handed to her like a crown. I smiled so warmly she didn't notice me pocket her silk napkin. Souvenirs matter. In war you don't always need cannons. Sometimes you need splinters. I salted Lila's imported face cream with a pinch of baking soda. By morning, her perfect cheeks bloomed with red patches that no filter could hide. I swapped Roland's cologne bottle, already tampered with, for one of Evelyn's samples. At his investor meeting the following week, his boss asked, "What's that cheap smell?" Loud enough for the whole room to hear. I left Evelyn's Tesla key inside the freezer beneath the peas. When she tore the kitchen apart searching, I murmured, "Have you tried looking in cold places?" The bracelet on my wrist blinked helpfully, as though I were the one who needed rescuing. Small victories stitched into a tapestry. They didn't see the pattern, but I did. Every day, the house became less theirs, more mine. Dr. Harrow reappeared 2 days later, summoned by Lila's growing frustration. He examined me briefly, then turned to her. "We'll need more consistent evidence," he said carefully. Without documentation, I can't certify diminished capacity. Lila's jaw tightened. But she's clearly slipping. I leaned in, whispering as though sharing a secret, "You're very handsome for a dentist." Harrow chuckled. "See? She's playful, not delusional." He left before she could argue. I added his chuckle to my growing collection of receipts. One day soon, I would spread them out like tarot cards on a table, proof of betrayal, proof of conspiracy, proof of my survival. That night, I sat in the beige guest suite with Bentley curled at my feet. I dialed Peter. "They're escalating," I whispered. "They think I'm a ward in waiting. They want my vineyard, my house, my life." Peter's voice was steady, anchoring me. "Amanda, you've played their game long enough. When you're ready, I'll help you walk out. You don't need to do this alone." Alone. Roland's word meant to scare me. But alone is not abandoned. Alone is preparation. I pressed the bracelet once more, sending Roland's phone another jolt in whatever hospital room he'd landed in. I pictured him waking with a start, sweating cheap cologne, wondering why his world tilted sideways. And I smiled. Because this house of cards he built. It was already trembling. The hospital released Roland after exhaustive observation. The paperwork said possible reaction to supplements, and the doctor suggested stress management. He came home pale, embarrassed, and furious at me for pressing the bracelet during his stay. Lila hovered beside him, cheeks still red from the sabotage of her face cream, whispering about next steps. I played the part of the meek guest, folding beige towels, smiling vaguely, asking if Bentley was my little grandson. Every time I pressed that button, Roland twitched. It was Pavlovian now. The hunter trained by his prey. While Roland slept off his pharmaceutical hallucinations, I arranged to meet my lawyer. Mrs. Lennox's office smelled like cedar and peppermint, 2 scents that do not forgive. I placed the napkin from Evelyn's blouse, Harrow's chuckling dismissal, and the voice recording of Roland whispering to the doctor into a neat pile. She adjusted her brooch, a tiny silver fox. "Amanda, they're trying to build a case. But you've already built a better one. You've got motive, method, and intent on their side. On yours, you've got documentation and a clean bill of health from Dr. Patel. If this goes to court, it won't end how they think." I leaned forward. "I don't want a courtroom fight. I want them to know I can win it." "Then let's leak carefully," she said. "A well-placed letter, a few conversations in the right ears. The thread is often enough." The following Saturday, Evelyn hosted a dinner in her sprawling living room. Red silk again, Tesla parked where the whole neighborhood could see. She raised a glass to family loyalty, and everyone toasted as though it were champagne, instead of cheap Prosecco poured into crystal. I let myself wobble a little, dropping my fork with a clatter. "Where am I again?" I whispered loudly. The room fell silent. Lila's eyes glittered. Evelyn smirked. Roland squeezed my hand, rehearsing his role as savior. Then I straightened my back and looked directly at Harrow, seated 2 places down. "Doctor, would you mind telling the room what my son asked of you in the hallway 2 weeks ago? I have the recording if your memory is foggy." The room inhaled. Harrow froze, his wine glass trembling. Evelyn's smile collapsed like wet paper. Lila's phone slipped from her hand. "I'm sorry." Harrow stammered. "You should be," I said. I slid Mrs. Lennox's letter across the table. On the letterhead, bold as scripture, it read, "Amanda Collins is of sound mind, competent in all financial and legal matters. Any attempt to suggest otherwise without documented medical proof may be considered fraudulent and actionable in court." The silence was sweeter than wine. Later that night, Roland stormed into the guest suite. His cologne still reeked of knockoff flowers. "Why are you doing this?" he demanded. "We were trying to protect you." "Protect me from what?" I asked softly. "My own vineyard. My own money. My own mind. You don't understand, he snapped. Do you think Evelyn and Lila will take care of me if you leave everything to me when you— He stopped, realizing what he'd admitted. When I what? I said. He swallowed. When you can't take care of yourself anymore. Bentley growled low at my feet, hackles raised. I reached down, stroking his fur with Roland's hairbrush, leaving one more piece of evidence tangled in Bentley's coat. By Monday morning, whispers were already spreading. Harrow's reputation cracked under the weight of rumor. Lawyers don't need proof to wound, just suggestion. Evelyn skipped her tennis game, humiliated. Lila avoided selfies until the rash cleared. And Roland? He dragged himself to work, investors sniffing the sour perfume of failure. His boss wrinkled his nose and muttered, "What's that smell?" loud enough for everyone to hear. I, meanwhile, scheduled an appointment with a neurologist recommended by Dr. Patel. Document me, I said. Every test you have. I want a file thick enough to crush lies. The neurologist raised an eyebrow. You seem perfectly capable. That's the point, I replied. That night, I pressed the red button again. Roland arrived, eyes dark with exhaustion, muttering about deadlines missed. What now? He snapped. I smiled sweetly. I forgot where I put my bicycle. Oh wait, you never bought me one. And as he clenched his fists, I realized something important: the bracelet wasn't a leash. It was a whip. I made Roland's house my stage. Every room, every drawer, every safety measure they put in place became part of my script. If they wanted the performance of a failing mind, I would give it to them, except this time the audience would question whether the actor was Roland instead. Roland still insisted on monitoring my supplements. He placed a new bottle on the counter, smug as a schoolboy hiding a frog in someone's desk. I thanked him sweetly and waited until he left the room. Into his own vitamins, his precious energy boosters, I slipped 2 of the pills from my tampered bottle. The very same kind he once tried to pass off to me. He swallowed them before his big pitch meeting that week. By the time he stood in front of investors, he was sweating through his shirt, rambling about visions for vineyards on Mars, and stumbling over simple numbers. One of them whispered, "Is he drunk?" Another on something. He came home shaking, furious, blaming me. You pressed the button while I was in the middle of my presentation. I must have forgotten, I said, wide-eyed. Isn't that what you wanted? For me to forget? Lila left her ivory-handled hairbrush in the bathroom. I gave it to Bentley, my loyal co-conspirator. He loved it, chewed, pawed, rolled. I brushed his coat until he shone, then returned it to Lila's vanity with a single wiry black hair still clinging. The next morning, she shrieked as though she'd discovered a body. This isn't mine. Whose hair is this? Roland tried to calm her, but suspicion already flickered in her eyes. Marriages don't need affairs to corrode, they need only the suggestion of one. One evening, I watched Lila spritz her neck with what she thought was her imported French fragrance. Within minutes, she smelled like a teenage mall kiosk, cheap sugar and artificial flowers. At their dinner party that night, her friends coughed politely, eyes watering. Evelyn leaned in to whisper, "Darling, what on earth are you wearing?" I hid my smile behind my glass of water. Revenge doesn't always need thunder. Sometimes it's aerosol. I made a sport of it, pretending not to recognize Roland's boss when he stopped by the house. "Are you the gardener?" I asked sweetly, while the man's eyebrows shot up. Greeting neighbors I've known for 20 years with a confused squint. "Do I know you?" I'd ask, always when Roland was watching. Leaving sticky notes in odd places, "Remember to water the Tesla," taped to Evelyn's door. Every slip chipped away at Roland's credibility. His colleagues whispered. His wife doubted. His mother-in-law frowned. He thought the narrative was tightening. In truth, it was unraveling around his neck. Evelyn, queen of silk and Teslas, began looking at me differently. No longer pitying. More cautious. She found her car keys in the freezer again, and her favorite earrings hidden in the dishwasher. She suspected me, I could tell, but she also suspected Roland. After all, wasn't he the one who swore I couldn't be left alone? If things went missing, if chaos brewed in her pristine house, who else could be responsible but her new son? I watched her doubt him over cocktails one evening. "Perhaps you're too stressed, Roland," she murmured. "You've been careless lately." Careless. That word sliced deeper than she knew. Meanwhile, I was building my arsenal. Every voice note, every suspicious pill, every video of Roland stumbling or ranting went into a neatly organized digital folder, password protected and synced to the cloud. Mrs. Lennox had copies. Dr. Patel had notes. Even Peter knew enough to testify. If they thought they could bury me alive in a nursing home, I was preparing to bury them in evidence. It was a Tuesday when I staged my masterpiece. I placed one of Evelyn's priceless vases near the edge of the console table. When Roland stormed in late from work, briefcase swinging, it toppled with a crash. Evelyn shrieked. Lila gasped. Roland stammered, "It wasn't me, it was Mom." I sat calmly in the armchair, hands folded. "Oh, Roland," I said sweetly. "Don't you remember? You told me earlier you were clumsy. Said you've been dropping things all week." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Lila's lips pressed thin. For the first time, the spotlight wasn't on me. It was on him. And as Roland stood amid porcelain shards, I pressed the red button again. His phone buzzed, shrill and merciless, demanding he rescue the very woman who was quietly destroying him from within his own walls. The vase incident shook Roland, but not enough. He still believed he could outwit me, that the narrative of poor confused Mom would hold if repeated often enough. So I gave him the chance to repeat it, loudly, publicly, fatally. Evelyn lived for appearances, so of course she organized a charity gala for the preservation of vineyards at the local country club. Every important person in our town was there, investors, politicians, her tennis circle, even Roland's boss. "Don't worry, Mom," Roland whispered as we walked in. "I'll keep you close." He guided me with one hand on my elbow, like a shepherd with a lamb destined for slaughter. Except I wasn't the lamb. Earlier that week, I'd switched Roland's stress vitamins again, replacing a few with the same hallucinogenic tablets he had once tried to slip me. By the time of the gala, he was already sweating through his tuxedo, blinking at the chandeliers as though they dripped stars. I played my part perfectly, smiling vaguely, clutching my red button bracelet, asking strangers if they were lost children. The guests chuckled politely, pitying me. They were primed for Roland's story. Halfway through dinner, Evelyn called for silence. She wanted Roland to speak, to honor family resilience. She handed him the microphone with the confidence of a queen knighting her heir. He began well enough, words rehearsed, tone smooth. But then the pills took hold. "My mother here, well, she's not really my mother anymore, you see. She's a ghost. No, not a ghost, a liability. She pressed the button again today, while I was shaving. I nearly cut my throat. Do you know how distracting that is?" Gasps around the room. Evelyn's smile faltered. "And Evelyn," Roland continued, voice rising, "you're the only real mother I've ever had. You gave me everything. Mom gave me, what? A vineyard and debt and nagging." He laughed wildly, then slammed the microphone onto the table. The feedback shrieked like a siren. The room froze. All eyes darted between Roland, shaking and incoherent, and me, his trembling mother with silver hair and calm eyes. I pressed the red button on my bracelet. The sound it made was barely audible, but Roland clutched his phone as it buzzed, wincing like it was a gunshot. "I'm sorry," I said softly into the silence. "I don't know why he's saying these things. My son, he's been under such terrible stress." Whispers rippled through the crowd, "He's unstable. She seems fine. Poor woman." Roland's boss excused himself abruptly, muttering about liabilities. Evelyn grabbed the microphone to regain control, but the damage was done. Back at the house, Roland exploded. "You made me look insane." I tilted my head. "Darling, I didn't make you take those pills. I didn't make you shout at donors. You did that yourself." Lila's silence was worse than her rage. She stood in the doorway, arms folded, perfume sour on her skin. For the first time, her gaze held no loyalty, only calculation. She was tallying costs and Roland was coming up short. Bentley trotted in, wagging his tail, brushing against my legs. I stroked his fur with Roland's toothbrush, then set it back in the bathroom cup where Roland would never guess its recent assignment. That night, lying in Evelyn's sterile guest bed, I felt the tide shift. For weeks I had been on defense, pretending, recording, gathering proof. But now the cracks were visible to everyone else. Roland wasn't the dutiful son of his story. He was unraveling in public, while I became the fragile yet dignified mother people instinctively defended. I pressed the bracelet once more before bed. Somewhere in the house, Roland's phone buzzed angrily. I smiled into the dark. The leash he gave me was choking him now. Roland barely slept after the gala. I heard him pacing the hallway at 3 a.m, muttering half-sentences to himself, the floorboards creaking like a metronome of guilt. By dawn he looked 10 years older, eyes red-rimmed, tie hanging crooked as he rushed out the door for work. He still hadn't shaved. I wondered if he was afraid of his own reflection now, the same way he seemed afraid of me. The fallout began faster than I expected. That afternoon his boss called the house phone while Roland was still out. I answered, voice polite, and the man wasted no time. "Mrs. Collins, I'm concerned. Roland's behavior last night was unacceptable. Investors are pulling out. If he can't stabilize, I'll have to reconsider his role." He hesitated, then added quietly, "You seemed perfectly lucid, by the way. I hope you're all right." That call I saved too, another little jewel for my collection. When Roland returned home, his tie was gone, his suit jacket wrinkled from being thrown in the car. He slammed the door, bellowing about betrayal, about people not understanding him, about the world being stacked against him. Lila listened for once, silent as stone, her eyes sharp and unblinking. She didn't soothe him, didn't stroke his arm, didn't even offer the sympathy she usually wore like perfume. Instead she simply said, "You embarrassed me," and walked upstairs. The marriage began to fray in small, delicious ways. I watched Lila put her phone face down on the table when she used to flaunt every notification. She lingered in doorways when Evelyn called, whispering in corners of the house. And when Roland tried to pull her into his spiral, explaining how it was all my fault, how I had tricked everyone, she only arched an eyebrow and asked, "Or maybe you've tricked yourself." It was the first time I saw her doubt him, and I savored it like wine. I kept playing my role. I pressed the bracelet at inconvenient hours, right before Roland left for an important meeting, in the middle of dinner, just as he sank into bed. Each time his phone shrieked, and each time he rushed to me, cursing, veins tight in his neck. I would look up with innocent eyes and murmur, "Oh, did I do it again?" He clenched his fists, but he never dared strike me. Not with Lila watching, not with Evelyn circling like a hawk, not with Bentley growling low in the corner. At the same time, I planted more tiny seeds. A shopping list tucked into Roland's briefcase with words scribbled sideways, "Help me, I'm lost." A set of keys switched so his car alarm wailed in the parking lot for half an hour. A wine order accidentally placed under his name for a $1,000 bottle he didn't remember buying. Slowly, the world began to look at him with the same pity he once directed at me. And then came the evening when Evelyn herself snapped. She'd invited her friends over for bridge, but Roland barged in halfway through, ranting about how none of them appreciated his sacrifices, how his career was being sabotaged. Evelyn hissed at him to lower his voice, but he only grew louder, pacing the room, spilling cheap cologne and self-pity into the air. Her friends exchanged looks, pursed their lips, and for the first time, Evelyn seemed embarrassed of him. "You need rest, Roland," she said coldly. "You're not yourself." I sat quietly in the corner, knitting a scarf I had no intention of finishing, and said nothing. Sometimes silence is the sharpest blade. That night, when Roland stumbled into the guest room to scold me, I looked him straight in the eye and whispered, "Son, I'm so proud of you." He blinked confused, maybe even moved, before realizing it wasn't praise at all. It was mockery, the kind he'd once written to Evelyn in that voice note, telling her she was the mother he'd always wanted. I watched the understanding hit him like a stone, and for a moment, I thought he might cry. The next morning, I made a decision. It was time to stop being their guest. Time to step out of this beige mausoleum and back into my own house, my own vineyard, my own skin. I had the recordings, the lawyer's letter, the doctor's notes. I had the sympathy of the town after the gala, and I had Roland's unraveling on full display. The house of cards was collapsing, and soon I would not just be free, I would be untouchable. But before leaving, I wanted him to taste just a little more of the humiliation he had prepared for me. So I slipped one more of those pills into his morning coffee, pressed the red button as he walked out the door, and watched him curse at the sky while his phone screamed my name. He thought he had written me out of the story. But it was my story all along. And I was just getting started. Roland's decline quickened after that last bitter cup of coffee. He staggered through the week like a man chasing shadows, losing track of appointments, arriving late, snapping at colleagues who once admired him. By Friday his boss had put him on leave, the polite corporate phrase that means we're done with you, but we won't fire you outright in case you sue. He came home broken, tie stuffed into his pocket, and for the first time, Lila didn't rush to greet him. She stayed upstairs, scrolling her phone, her voice floating down the stairs, detached and sharp, "You've embarrassed me enough." The silence between them grew louder each day. She began attending luncheons without him, posting smiling photos of herself and Evelyn while Roland sulked on the couch, unshaven, eyes fixed on nothing. When he tried to pull her into his orbit with whispers about my mother's betrayal, she snapped back, "Maybe you should look in the mirror." He didn't answer because he couldn't. The man who once strutted through boardrooms now sat hunched over, reeking of that cheap perfume I'd left in his bottle, his pride as cracked as the vase he'd once broken. I watched it all from the sidelines, still wearing the mask of the frail, forgetful woman. The bracelet remained on my wrist, a tiny weapon disguised as jewelry. I pressed it whenever I pleased, sometimes when Roland was finally dozing, sometimes during his rare phone calls with clients, sometimes for no reason at all. Each buzz shredded his nerves a little more. He had gifted me a leash, and I had made it into a whip. Meanwhile, my preparations were almost complete. Mrs. Lennox had updated all my documents, adding firewalls Roland could never breach. Dr. Patel's file was thick with proof of my competence. And now, thanks to the gala and Roland's public unraveling, the town itself whispered in my defense. At the market, at church, at the fitness studio, people leaned in with pity for me and doubt for him. "She seems fine," they said. "But he's acting strange." Reputation, once lost, doesn't return intact. One crisp morning, Peter arrived at the beige mausoleum Evelyn called home. He was holding a basket of grapes from my vineyard, their skins glistening like jewels. He looked at me with quiet strength and said, "Amanda, it's time to go back to your house. Enough pretending." We carried my things out the door while Roland sat on the couch, head in his hands. He didn't stop me. He didn't even lift his eyes. Lila stood in the doorway, arms crossed, neither helping him nor hindering me. Evelyn glared but said nothing, her silence heavier than her words. The empire they tried to build on my erasure was crumbling, and they all knew it. When I stepped back into my own home, Bentley bounded through the rooms as though reclaiming them for us both. The vineyard stretched outside my windows, green and golden under the sun, alive and untouchable. My house smelled like earth and memory. I breathed deeply, and for the first time in months, it smelled like freedom. That night, I poured a glass of my own wine and toasted myself. I had survived their plot. I had turned their schemes against them. I had won. But I wasn't finished, not yet. Because revenge, like wine, is best when it lingers on the tongue. The next morning, I pressed the bracelet again. Not because I was lost. Not because I needed saving. Simply because I knew Roland's phone would buzz wherever he was, bed, bar, or hospital, and the sound would remind him that he was the one chained now, not me. Roland tried to rebuild himself after I left Evelyn's house, but every attempt collapsed before it began. He sent me messages dripping with guilt, thinly veiled threats, and pleas for forgiveness, sometimes all in the same paragraph. I didn't answer. Silence is heavier than any word. Meanwhile, the town had made up its mind. At the market, people whispered behind his back. At church, pews shifted away from him. Evelyn still drove her Tesla, but her eyes darted when my name came up. And Lila, well, Lila was already slipping from his side like water through a sieve. I was back in my own home, the vineyard alive with harvest, Bentley racing between the rows as if guarding the land itself. Peter spent more evenings with me now, cooking simple dinners, laughing about nothing, reminding me what it felt like to be cherished without condition. Sometimes he stayed the night, and in the morning I would wake to the smell of coffee and the sound of him humming off-key in the kitchen. For half a year I had resisted the idea of another marriage, but Peter was patient, never pressing, only showing me with every gesture that his care was steady. But I wasn't ready to let go of my revenge yet. Not while Roland still strutted with scraps of dignity. He needed to feel what I had felt, the gnawing sense of being unmoored, of watching your own reality slip from your hands. The chance came at Evelyn's autumn garden party, her favorite stage. She invited the whole neighborhood, investors, her bridge club, everyone who mattered in her little empire. Roland, desperate to salvage his reputation, came dressed sharply, hair slicked, voice rehearsed. He spoke loudly, laughed too much, tried to charm the crowd into forgetting his recent disasters. I stood by the roses with Peter, holding a glass of wine, pretending to be the fragile mother who had come only for appearances. When the moment was right, I pressed the bracelet. Roland's phone shrieked in his pocket. He fumbled, sweating. "Excuse me," he muttered, pulling it out. The guests watched as his face drained of color, eyes darting toward me. "She keeps doing this," he barked suddenly, too loud, too raw. "She's not right in the head. She's ruining everything." The crowd stiffened. Evelyn's friends exchanged looks, lips pursed. Lila crossed her arms and said, flatly, "Maybe you should worry about yourself, Roland." The sentence cut him like glass. His face crumpled, anger spilling out uncontrolled. He knocked a wine glass off the table, shards scattering at his feet. I put a hand to my chest, my voice trembling just enough. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause trouble." "No," he shouted, finger pointed at me, voice breaking. "You're the trouble, you always have been." "You should be," he stopped himself, choking on the word. "Should be gone." Everyone heard it anyway. The silence that followed was unbearable for him. For me, it was music. That night, after Peter drove me home, he poured me another glass of wine and said quietly, "Amanda, you've proven your point. Maybe it's time to let it rest." I looked at him, at the lines around his kind eyes, at the steady hands that had carried me through the storm without asking for anything in return. And I realized he was right. Revenge was a dish I had served and savored. But love, at this stage in my life, was rarer and sweeter. When he asked me again, for the second time, if I would marry him, I didn't hesitate. I said yes. The next weeks were a blur of plans. My vineyard became a stage for our small ceremony, guests from the town smiling at us with genuine warmth. Roland wasn't invited. Lila didn't ask to come. Evelyn stayed silent, her empire shrinking behind closed doors. I walked down the aisle in a simple dress, Bentley trotting proudly beside me, and when Peter placed the ring on my finger, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, safety. But even in safety, I couldn't resist one last indulgence. On the flight to Australia for our honeymoon, I wore Roland's birthday gift, the silver bracelet with its red button. Halfway across the Pacific, as Peter dozed against my shoulder, I pressed it once, then twice, just to imagine Roland's phone buzzing angrily in the night, keeping him awake while I soared thousands of miles away. I smiled, closed my eyes, and let the hum of the engines carry me toward a future that was finally mine. Roland's collapse wasn't a sudden crash but a slow, grinding fall, the kind that strips a man layer by layer until there's nothing left but the raw bones of truth. By the time Peter and I returned from Australia, his name had become a cautionary whisper in town. Investors avoided him. Evelyn no longer paraded him like a prize. Even Lila had moved back into her mother's house, her Instagram filled with solo brunches and vague captions about new beginnings. I didn't need to press the bracelet anymore, its ghost haunted him without my help. People said he jumped every time his phone buzzed, even if it was just an email or a weather alert. He'd given me that little piece of power, and it had outlived its batteries. When I finally saw him again, months later, it was at the vineyard. He came uninvited, walking slowly through the rows, hands shoved deep in his pockets. His hair was longer, unkempt, and his suit no longer fit him properly. I stood on the porch with Bentley at my side, Peter's arm warm around my shoulders. "Mom," Roland said hoarsely, looking up at me. I don't know what happened. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence weigh on him, the way he once let his silence crush me after sending that message to Evelyn. Finally, I said, "You happened, Roland. You tried to make me disappear, and you disappeared yourself instead." He lowered his head. I could see him searching for anger, for excuses, for some shard of the arrogance he once wore like armor. But all that came was a broken sigh. "I just wanted more." "You had more," I said softly. "You just didn't see it." He left without stepping onto the porch. Evelyn no longer called me. Lila never dared. Even Harrow's name was now linked to quiet scandal after too many rumors spread about the doctor who diagnoses on request. Every piece of their little conspiracy lay in ruins, while my life, my vineyard, my health, my marriage, flourished. On summer nights Peter and I would sit outside with glasses of wine, listening to the cicadas hum, Bentley stretched at our feet. Sometimes Peter teased me about the bracelet, which I still kept in the drawer by my bed. "Do you ever think of pressing it again, just for fun?" he asked once, laughing. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But revenge, like wine, is only sweet if you don't drink too much." I never pressed it again. I didn't need to. Roland's world had already collapsed, not with fire or scandal, but with the quiet erosion of trust, respect, and love. That was the true justice. And as I leaned into Peter's shoulder, the stars bright above the vineyard I had saved, I thought of the toothbrush, the perfume, the little games that led to this moment. Small acts, precise and merciless. My own rebellion against erasure. My proof that I was not finished, not fading, not gone. I had been Amanda Collins, mother, widow, winemaker. Now I was Amanda Collins, wife again, survivor and storyteller of my own life. And that was the final triumph. A year passed before I spoke publicly. By then, Roland's name was nothing more than a hushed cautionary tale whispered over coffee. People knew enough that he'd lost his job, that his marriage had ended, that Evelyn kept her distance. But they didn't know the full story. And I realized one evening, sipping wine with Peter under the stars, that silence was no longer protection. It was permission. So when the local paper asked me to contribute to their Voices of the Valley column, I said yes. I didn't use Roland's name, nor Evelyn's, nor Lila's. I simply wrote, "This is the story of how a woman in her 60s refused to be erased." I told them about the bracelet, about the pills switched in the night, about the subtle conspiracies families can weave when greed overtakes love. I didn't give every detail, of course, some things belonged to me alone, but I gave enough. Enough for women reading at their breakfast tables to nod and murmur, "I've felt that too." The peace spread beyond the valley. Letters arrived at my vineyard, some typed, some handwritten, thanking me for saying aloud what too many had lived silently. Women who'd been sidelined by children, discarded by spouses, underestimated by doctors. They saw themselves in my words, and for the first time, I saw myself reflected not as a victim but as proof. Proof that even in your 60s, you can fight back. Proof that survival can be sharp and dignity louder than shame. Roland must have read it. He never contacted me, but I heard from others that he'd moved out of town, drifting from job to job, carrying a phone he could barely look at. I imagined him, each buzz still a ghost of the leash he gave me, the reminder of the mother he tried to silence and couldn't. Peter read the article aloud one night, smiling between sentences, pausing only to kiss my temple. "Amanda, you've turned revenge into a parable," he said. "You've taken pain and made it into power." And I realized he was right. What began as a private war had become something else entirely. My vineyard was thriving again, my marriage warm and steady, my story no longer whispered in corners but told with pride. The bracelet lay in a drawer, its battery long dead, but its legacy pulsed in every word I'd written. I wasn't just Amanda Collins, survivor. I was Amanda Collins, the woman who told her own story before anyone else could twist it. And as long as I had breath, no one, not a son, not a doctor, not a silk-draped queen with a Tesla, would erase me again. A year passed before I spoke publicly. By then, Roland's name was nothing more than a hushed cautionary tale whispered over coffee. People knew enough that he'd lost his job, that his marriage had ended, that Evelyn kept her distance. But they didn't know the full story. And I realized one evening, sipping wine with Peter under the stars, that silence was no longer protection. It was permission. So when the local paper asked me to contribute to their Voices of the Valley column, I said yes. I didn't use Roland's name, nor Evelyn's, nor Lila's. I simply wrote, "This is the story of how a woman in her 60s refused to be erased." I told them about the bracelet, about the pills switched in the night, about the subtle conspiracies families can weave when greed overtakes love. I didn't give every detail, of course, some things belonged to me alone, but I gave enough. Enough for women reading at their breakfast tables to nod and murmur, "I've felt that too." The peace spread beyond the valley. Letters arrived at my vineyard, some typed, some handwritten, thanking me for saying aloud what too many had lived silently. Women who'd been sidelined by children, discarded by spouses, underestimated by doctors. They saw themselves in my words, and for the first time, I saw myself reflected not as a victim but as proof. Proof that even in your 60s, you can fight back. Proof that survival can be sharp and dignity louder than shame. Roland must have read it. He never contacted me, but I heard from others that he'd moved out of town, drifting from job to job, carrying a phone he could barely look at. I imagined him, each buzz still a ghost of the leash he gave me, the reminder of the mother he tried to silence and couldn't. Peter read the article aloud one night, smiling between sentences, pausing only to kiss my temple. "Amanda, you've turned revenge into a parable," he said. "You've taken pain and made it into power." And I realized he was right. What began as a private war had become something else entirely. My vineyard was thriving again, my marriage warm and steady, my story no longer whispered in corners but told with pride. The bracelet lay in a drawer, its battery long dead, but its legacy pulsed in every word I'd written. I wasn't just Amanda Collins, survivor. I was Amanda Collins, the woman who told her own story before anyone else could twist it. And as long as I had breath, no one, not a son, not a doctor, not a silk-draped queen with a Tesla, would erase me again. It was a clear spring morning when I finally closed the drawer that held the bracelet. Its silver chain had dulled with time, the red button a silent eye that no longer blinked. I ran my thumb across it once more, and then tucked it beneath scarves I rarely wore. Some relics deserved to be kept but never again touched. Roland hadn't called in months. Word drifted back to me through neighbors and Evelyn's bitter acquaintances. He was working odd jobs in another town, drinking too much, chasing opportunities that never lasted. His name had become a ghost. When people mentioned him at all, it was with a sad shake of the head, as though he'd been swallowed by the very lies he once tried to force upon me. I didn't correct them. I didn't defend him. Some silences are merciful, and some are deserved. Life without his shadow was brighter than I'd ever imagined. The vineyard was alive again, harvests plentiful, laughter echoing between the rows when workers gathered for long afternoons of picking. Bentley raced after the birds, older now but still carrying the joy of a pup. And Peter, steady, kind Peter, had turned my days into something softer. We traveled to places I'd once only dreamed of, learned to dance clumsily in the kitchen, argued about recipes, and then laughed until our sides ached. I had thought my heart too scarred for marriage again, but I had been wrong. Some loves aren't replacements. They're restorations. One evening, as the sun bled gold over the vines, I sat with Peter on the porch, a glass of wine in my hand. I thought about the woman I had been, frightened, cornered, ready to be erased. And then the woman I had become, sharp, unyielding, unwilling to vanish quietly. Revenge had been my fuel, but it wasn't my legacy. My legacy was survival, and the vineyard, and the words I'd written that gave other women permission to fight. Peter squeezed my hand. "What are you thinking?" he asked. I smiled into the twilight. That I won. Not against Roland. Not even against Evelyn or Lila. I had won against the story they tried to write for me, that I was old, fading, forgetful, finished. They thought they could bury me in silence. Instead, I'd found my voice and my future. I raised my glass to the horizon, to the vineyard, to the men beside me, to the life I had reclaimed. The last chapter of Roland's betrayal had been written, and the final word belonged to me. And it was freedom.